Mark Hill from Greenleafs. Next week, we will take the decision to leave the European Union. And the reason is because it has become legally extremely convoluted not to do so. You might think with a Remain Prime Minister, a Remain Civil Service, a Remain Cabinet, a Remain State Broadcaster, Remain NGOs and various other media outlets and all of the establishment backing Remain, that actually that wouldn't be the case. That somehow at the last minute they will pull a rabbit out of the hat and manage to hold us inside the European Union. Now obviously I hope not, but actually I think that we have now reached the point where legally it'll be very tough for them to pull that rabbit out of the hat. And we haven't seen during the past 2 3/4 years many rabbits coming out of hats. In fact, everything has been pretty predictable since the beginning. Not a lot has happened actually, and that is probably the reason for the crisis. The reason is that legally now the government and Parliament are both constrained by the laws that they have already passed. In particular, Article 50 and the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Act, and then following that the European Union Withdrawal Act. Now those acts were both controversial but did pass, and they have also set out both the Article 50 notification, how the notification is reflected in British law, and then the Article 50 actually then being notified to the EU. Now, there is an issue with the Cooper Amendment that was passed on the 27th of February. This is Amendment number F, which allows for a meaningful vote on the withdrawal agreement, followed by a vote to accept or rule out no deal, and then finally an extension vote on Article 50. And those 3 votes are going to be taking place next week, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. Now, the problem for the Remainers is that if they decide to go for Brexit in name only by getting the withdrawal agreement passed, even if the withdrawal agreement secures the support of the Commons on Tuesday, and that is now looking extremely unlikely, then the nature of the legal constraints on passing the withdrawal agreement are such that it's very difficult to see it being done by the 29th of March. We would, for example, have to ask for any changes in the withdrawal agreement, including this legally binding exit from the backstop, that is the key controversy. We would have to get that passed by the EU 27. And in order to get the rest of the withdrawal agreement through, the members of Parliament are themselves going to have to be persuaded that they face a very real threat if they don't pass it. After all, this agreement could be forged after the 29th of March. Now, the threat that the government have come up with is that if the Brexiteer Tories do not vote in favour of the withdrawal agreement as it's drafted, that they will extend Article 50. The Brexit supporting MPs have actually reacted by saying, well, fine, extend. But the problems with extending Article 50 are terrible. In particular, we have to secure EU permission to extend, which they may not be willing to grant. And the consequences are that we would remain EU citizens for longer, and so would potentially end up being part of the next European elections, which, again, the EU is not going to want. But even if the withdrawal agreement did get through, the government still has to put through the legislation to support the withdrawal agreement in detail inside our legislation before the 29th of March, which is the date on which we otherwise leave. And so because they have to amend UK legislation, that means in turn they have to get UK legislation through to amend the withdrawal agreement. Well, this is now suddenly extremely demanding. We're middle of March now. We have only another few weeks to potentially redraft the law that has already been passed overwhelmingly, run it through the Commons, run it through the Lords, run it through the Commons again. It's all becoming actually administratively extremely hard.